In this video, I'm going to talk about working with text in Photoshop. Although Photoshop is not the best tool to work with typography, it still offers quite a lot of options. You can work with styles as well, similarly to InDesign. But of course, in the Creative Cloud, InDesign is the best tool whenever you have to work with a lot of text. Usually we create flyers or posters in Photoshop, which would require less text and maybe a bit more stylized text. While when you have to format several pages of text, you would then use InDesign. Here are a couple of examples showing when Photoshop is better to use to work with type. So you can see in these examples, type is more part of the composition as a graphic element, rather than just simply there to be able to read the text. So even here in the ballerina example, the title text is combined into the graphic itself. So it's part of the photograph, and these type of special effects are easiest to do in Photoshop. Or whenever you have to add special effects like 3D, lighting, or even more complex effects like this one here at the bottom. So these are all best done in Photoshop, while if you work with more text and more complex page layouts, that's when you are better off using Adobe InDesign. Because although Photoshop offers a lot of typographic features, InDesign is much better at handling longer documents and generally working with text-heavy designs. So coming back to this example that I prepared here, I would like to add some text on this image. And this could be a website or a banner or even a flyer. But before I add the text that I prepared from an article, I'm going to show you how to use the type tool. So the type tool is here on the toolbar. You can also select it by pressing T on the keyboard. With this tool selected, you can click anywhere on the document and start typing. So if I just type in mountains, for example, you will see this currently is really small, the text, and it's hard to read it. Once I select the text, so I have to highlight it, I can increase the size here in the options bar. Now it always depends on the size of your image. If you have a lower resolution image, you won't need as high point size for the type. But in this case, because this is a high resolution image, we have to increase it. So we can use it from the drop down and select a certain point size like that. So from this list, or you can also type it in. So if I just type in 70, you can see it already increased. But my preferred way of changing the size would be to click and drag on the icon to the left of the point size. With that, you can very quickly change the size of the text. Or you can also use a shortcut, Command-Shift or Control-Shift greater than sign on the keyboard would increase the size, and less than sign will decrease the size. Alternatively, you can also use the free transform tool, but for that first you need to accept typing. Now there's also a couple of ways of doing that, either clicking on the tick here on the top or switching to any of the other tools. Normally I would switch to the move tool. You can also press escape if you are a Creative Cloud user, and then a dialog box will come up and ask you whether you want to accept or cancel typing with that shortcut. Another way is also to use Command or Control Enter, which will also accept typing. And then now if I use the Edit Free Transform command or Control or Command T, I can shift, drag any of the corner points to resize the text. Remember to hold down Shift, otherwise you end up stretching your text, and that's a major typographic sin to do. So I'm just going to keep it the way it is. I can press Escape to revert back without changing its size. And notice that the text is a separate layer in the Layers panel. If I want to edit the text, all I need to do is to use the Type tool again and click on the text to edit it. Or I can also quickly highlight all the text in this layer by double-clicking on the thumbnail of the text layer. So by doing that, it immediately highlights all the text within this layer. That can help me to change, for example, the font. Now the font selector will give you quite a lot of options. First of all, you can favorite the fonts that you use most of the time. I would like to mark the font that I use quite often, which is Myriad Pro Regular. So I'm going to click on that little star next to the name. Once again, this option will only be available in Creative Cloud, but using that feature, next time I can just click on the star option here on the top and it will only show the favorite fonts. So I can quickly select another one I favorited earlier. So under the font selector, we have a couple of filtering options and favorite font is one of them. If I turn this off, I can see all the type again. And another great feature is called similar fonts. Now if I select a font, let's say this one, American Typewriter, and I like the way it looks, but I might want to choose something similar to this, I can again go there and choose this feature, which is again only in Creative Cloud, but I really like this option. This will help me to pick similar looking fonts. The little icons next to the preview samples there on the right will mean whether it's a true type or open type font. And there's also one additional thing here. If you want to search for a certain font, you can just type in the name on the top. Let's say I'm looking for Triumph Pro. You see, I just started typing, immediately came up. So I can choose maybe this bold version. But then if I'm looking for only the bold fonts, I could also just type that in, and that way Photoshop will be able to find all the fonts which has bold versions. So I could switch to, for example, this one. You can even search for fonts based on their class. So if I select this one once again and go back to the font selector, you can find this drop down where it says all classes. And from there you can select serif, sans serif, script, and all these other options. So if I select serif fonts, you will see only those fonts which has serif on them, or we can also choose the one without serif, so that's the sans serif, or also called modern typefaces. But the same way we can also find script, which have more handwritten, or even specifically handwritten fonts like these. And this feature again just makes it very easy in Creative Cloud to find the certain font that you are looking for, especially if you have loads of fonts installed on your computer. The fonts that you can choose from the font selector are obviously the fonts that you have installed on your computer. If you can't find anything that would match the design you are working on, there is also another great feature called Adobe Typekit. Once again, unfortunately, this will only be available in Creative Cloud. So this feature comes together with the Creative Cloud subscription, and you can find it here in the font selector on the right. So you can choose Add Fonts from Typekit, which will open up a browser window where you can look for fonts. So I can find classification like serif, sans serif, slab serif, handwritten, decorative, and I can also choose whether this project is going to be used on the web or desktop. If it's selected for sync, that's desktop use, which means it's mainly going to be used for print. There's also several other options here below, but I'm just going to pick one of these. Let's say this one. If I like this font and I want to use it in my projects, what I need to do is to click on Use Fonts, synchronize it, and now it's added to my Creative Cloud. It also came up here on the top right. That message tells me that now it should be available in Photoshop and all the other Adobe applications as well. So now if I go back, have my text selected, and I can just click on the font selector, but I want to filter for fonts from Typekit, and then I can see the ones that are available on my computer, which are all synchronized from Adobe Typekit, and there I can quickly find a new one that I just downloaded. Once I select that, you will see it already on the text. The text layer that we created currently is horizontal, but we can always turn it into vertical. So by clicking on this icon here next to the font selector, we can turn it into vertical or turn it back again to horizontal. The way we created this text layer is that we just clicked on the canvas and then started typing. That created a line type, but if you want to create space for more text, you should click and drag with the type tool, and that will create an area type. So if I click and drag with the type tool, I can define an area in which I can add some text. Now I'm going to switch back to my favorite font, so I'm going to use the shortcut to get to it by using filtering. And I select Myriad Pro Regular, change the size probably for 40. And here you can also set up the color you wish to use for your text. I'm going to change this to white. Now if I go to the type menu, I show you a very cool feature called Paste Lorem Ipsum. This is called a dummy text, which just generates text for the selected area. It looks Latin, but it actually doesn't make any sense. It's something we use in design when we don't have the copy available yet, and we just want to fill in an area and see how the formatted text will look like. So the advantage of using area type is that you can always increase, decrease the size of your frame, and you see the text will automatically reflow in that area. While with the original text that we had, the mountains text, I will never have a second line created automatically. I would have to press enter or return to be able to start typing in a new line. Now, of course, if you have your title and the rest of the text separate on two separate layers, you can just use the same shortcut we used before for layers. Control or Command click and dragging, I can move them separately very quickly. I prefer to separate the very differently formatted text in Photoshop and don't keep them all in one text layer, although you can do that if you want. And in case you want to bring in some text from a Word document, for example, or any text documents, you would have to first select that document file, select the text which you want to bring in, and let's say this is going to be my title, so I can copy that, come back to Photoshop, select the text by double-clicking on the thumbnail, and then just paste, Command or Control V. And you see it will remember the formatting I've set up, and it just replaces the text with that new text I brought in. So I can accept that change, and I can go back again, select the rest of the text from this article from Joshua, and then I'm going to select that other text layer and replace the text there. If I quickly want to change the size of all this text, I could use another shortcut, Command or Control A, while you are in text editing mode, and then you can use the ways that we've learned before to resize the text. You see, I can quickly adjust the size, and then if I feel like, I can also adjust my frame, because it's never good to have too wide frames for the body copy, the actual article itself. It makes it quite hard to read. But also when you have images in the background, they can make it hard to read your text. So there's many ways to help make the text more legible, but that should always be the main priority when you use text on top of images, or just generally text in design, that it has to be legible. So a quick way to help legibility would be to have a black rectangle, for example, behind the text. And then we can also increase the size of this rectangle if it's not wide enough, like that. And then you see I'm using opacity set to 60%, so it's a not completely black vector shape. I reduced its opacity, and that way I can see through it, so I still see the landscape in the background, but also it just makes it much easier to read the text. At this point, I could also resize the title just so it fits in there by using Free Transform. And let me show you one last shortcut, a very useful one again. If you want to quickly fill a selected text layer with a color that's currently selected, like my white is my foreground color, I could use the Alt backspace or Option backspace on Mac to apply the foreground color, or Command Control backspace for applying background color on the selected layer. This of course works on selected text as well. So if I want the backlight text, for example, to be black, I could use Command backspace, and you see now that turned black. So if you have something highlighted, the shortcut will only work on the highlighted text. Otherwise, it applies onto the whole text within that layer. So this was a quick introduction of how to work with type, but in the next video, I'm going to explain more about paragraph formatting, also how to save styles, and I will also teach you a couple of additional very useful shortcuts.